Thanks so much for being here today. If we haven't met before, I'm Becca Pad, the library director at CCS. And today we're here for the Faculty Professional Development Lecture on AI in Studio classes. And I'm going to start by introducing both of our speakers, and then I will be turning it over to them for their presentations. After their presentations, we will have time for a Q&A at the end. If you have questions during either of the speakers' presentations, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will be recording them so that we can share them during the Q&A session. We're really hoping that after the presentations today, there will be an opportunity for dialogue around what you are doing in your own classrooms as well. This is really a kickoff to talking about how faculty are using AI with students in their classrooms or even in your own professional practices. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing Melanie McClintock, who is Associate Professor and Chair of Graduate Color and Material Design at CCS. She's a multidisciplinary designer, artist, and educator. And before joining the College for Creative Studies, she spent 2 decades working in the fashion design industry and academia in New York, San Francisco, Qatar, and Indonesia. Her exhibit Color Lab focused on the materiality of color to create interactive landscapes through point of origin pigments, and her research interests include objects and experiences with a sense of place, the materiality of color, reimagining waste materials, adaptive design for climate change, and trend futures. So thanks, Melanie, for joining us. And we also have Associate Professor of Product Design, Anthony Reale, who is a designer, educator, and inventor focused on the future of practical innovation. Sometimes when I have to read it out loud, I want to get it right for you. Okay, so he's secured 6 US patents and oversaw 600 designs that that have gone into production during his time at the SPX Corporation. His award-winning project, Straight Power, the shark-inspired kinetic water turbine, continues to inform his research, and his practical work includes a notable 32-foot decorative cellular tower on the Eastern Michigan University campus. And Anthony's research interests include the Internet of Things, smart cities, biomimicry, and 3D modeling. Thanks for bearing with me through those introductions. We're really excited to have both of them here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to get us started. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to be sharing with you guys some slides about what's happening in my studio class. This was really fun to put together for you, so I'm excited to share this. I just need to get the full screen button here. All right. So I'm currently teaching a studio in product design, and it's really about designing for competition. One of the things I've noticed is there are so many competitions that students could be entering into and they're not. And oftentimes it's because they have this feeling of, I'm not good enough, it's too complicated. And so I wanted to lower the barrier of entry for that. So my goal for the course was to really tackle those emotional hurdles and to come up with an organized structure that they will kind of builds their confidence and creates excellent outcomes. So when I talk to students, I realize that they are certainly uncertain and they're pretty sure that they are about everything that they do. And so trying to address that uncertainty is really one of the steps of organization. For myself, I would say I'm a completely scattered brain individual thinking in 1,000 directions, and to have a tool that helps put all my thoughts together in one place really allows me to communicate more effectively to these students. So for student outcomes, what am I really looking for? Self-assurance, motivation, and the ability for them to believe that they can win these things. How did I use AI and am using AI in this studio? To help them organize their thoughts, for us to organize my thoughts, and to create a consistent design direction that they can see through the entire course. So they're not relearning how to communicate with me and with the course. So real quick, we have to empower them. So how can we empower them? Well, we've got a lot of different learners in our class, and one way to do that is to give them a clear timeline that they can see. Now, myself, before I start a class, I write out what I want all my outcomes to be. I put that right into AI. I tell the AI, um, if this is 15-week courses, I want an assignment this day, this day, this day, this day. What does a structured outline like that look like? It organizes it, and then I go back and I work through that organizational structure and I start filling in all the details. So every week a student comes to class, they know that they're going to be doing something. In this particular studio, they have something due for the first 11 weeks, which isn't typical of how studios were organized. All of these assignments, like 99% of them, can be completed in the class time that we are in studio. So then class becomes valuable, student participation in class becomes valuable, and the whole process is then kind of like building on itself week from week, and it's not a big rush at the end to get stuff done. You've attacked it little bites at a time. So what does a typical assignment look like? This is what an assignment in my class looks like. And there's a lot of words here, okay? There's a lot of words here. So all of these words are for those students that need all the details spelled out. For the students that do not want to read, there's always a deliverable section at the bottom. This is what I'm looking for. I don't want to limit their creativity. I don't want to limit how they express their creativity. So as long as they're hitting these points down here at the bottom, where it's deliverables, visual maps, slides, then I'm okay with it. So for this first week, they had to go out and research all the different types of competitions that are out there. And in some of these competitions, they have over 50 categories that they could be entering into. That is an absurd amount of work to really get through. When I had them take Gemini, I said, use Gemini, go to these websites. And I did have apprehension from them in class. And I'm like, have it read and look for you and just break down an outline of what's actually on this web page, because there's so many pictures that you get distracted or you go down these little rabbit holes, and it helps keep them on task. So assignment one, you've set up a deliverable, you've allowed them to go out and do research. They start to see what the actual competition is, and they start to visualize like, oh, this isn't like, this is good, but it's not unobtainable. I could absolutely produce this. Our next step is the reflection step. And I started including this in almost every single assignment. And it's just really short, 15 minutes. Give me 100 to 150 words and tell me about how your user needs and opportunities build on your week 2 proposal. So every week I ask them to reflect on, hey, what you're turning in today, how is it supported by what you did in week 1 and week 2? And then if it changed, then you need to change what you did on week 1 and week 2 and update your research or your proposal, so they feel like they have control over that dialogue. So I'm using AI to kind of structure this course in a way that they're going through this same process. And what I noticed, and this was such a wonderful thing to have happen, about week 4, I started getting this question. It seems like when I go to do my reflections, it's the same, like I'm saying the same thing about what I discovered in week 3 and week 2 as being true. I'm like, because it's true then. And they're like, yeah. And then like this sense of confidence of when they started getting ready for midterm really changed the level and quality of their work. So using AI, because one of the things I did with AI is like, how do I get them to understand the importance of this work? And AI told me, it was like, hey, add a reflection component. So when I work through my courses and my syllabus, after I'm done writing it, I put it back in and I say, okay, how would we optimally organize this for people who have ADHD? How will we optimize and organize this for people that require high levels of detail? And then I try to create a hybrid approach between all of those. So here's the big win, right? I had to share this with you guys. I had to share the reflections. So reflections. This week, user needs and design opportunities build directly on my week two's proposal by emphasizing accessibility, home scale solutions for food and food waste. Right there. As soon as I got to that first sentence, I stopped reading and I'm like, victory, right? This person is engaging with their work. They're seeing what the positive outcome is. They're seeing what they did last week wasn't wasted efforts, and they found value in those interactions just based on that one sentence. And when they're turning stuff in for me, like it is, sometimes I give them a little thing to fill out, like, hey, fill out this little chart. And I'm like, or write it by hand, take pictures with your notes. It's very, very interactive. So I'm not limiting how they're doing classwork in class. If they're more visual, then they want to draw it out with all storyboards, or they want to kind of create a solid workflow, or they want to type and write out a bunch of stuff. It really allows me to be dynamic. The refinement. So after they've done all this refinement, they say in our process, one of the things they do is, what would the user say? And they come up with a list of questions. So I took all of their value-based questions. I took what they came up with, their project proposal should be. I put it into AI and I said, could you add any more questions to this list only based on what the student said was valuable to them? And it came up with, 4 or 5 additional questions that they had not asked. I included that in the notes response to them in the assignment. I have 16 students in this class, or 15 students, I think, in this class. And they are all entering into different competitions. So it's like trying to teach 15 independent studios. It's a really difficult task to do. And I don't think I would be as successful with it in giving them this level of detail and response back if I wasn't using AI. So AI went through and I recorded it. AI took 32 seconds to go through and scrub all those questions and to come up with those questions. And then I went through and I read them, I edited them, I took some out, I added a little bit more information. I spent an additional 3.5 to 6 minutes per student in coming up with my responses for them. So it really made that super efficient. So that refinement step was really good for them. I went a little further on this one and I said, how could I expand the student's vision for their own project? So I asked AI, I said, can you make a value-based pitch based on all the values that this student has said from before? So I just took their assignments, assignment 2, assignment 3, assignment 4, plunked it all in, and I said, give me a value-based pitch and what it would be like trying to propose this idea of this project. And it's not that they have to do that as an assignment, but it's something that they can read that allows them to see their project from a larger standpoint. And it gives them that confidence that not only is this real for me, oh my gosh, I could see this real in the world. And it adds just that next layer of confidence. And again, I would not have the time to write a full plan for every single student, right? But I have time to definitely correct the one that AI puts out there and make sure that it is completely tailored to their experience. And then the last step in this approach is compete. So by incorporating all these little reflective assignments, using AI to enhance both the grading process, the organization process of the class, and to help them kind of dig in deeper into some of these research areas, it's going to allow them to compete at a level of confidence that I know their work was already at, and kind of break down and lower the barrier of entry for them to pretty much promote and push their own work. So this is essentially the end of my talk. I look forward to hearing questions from you guys, but at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Melanie so she can go over her use of AI.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anthony. Going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm kind of took a different perspective. I'm definitely because it's graduate studies and we have, a lot of the projects that we do within the studio are sponsored, but they're also, we have a sort of a underlying self-led structure to the courses. And so I will be showing how AI is used in studio through the work of the students. So first of all, I thought it might be important to kind of clarify what we do in color and materials design, because I think that for some, there are still questions. We do educate students to have a mindset that are looking at how to use color and material finish strategies, connecting function, emotional meanings to products, environments, and experiences. And we work across all industries. In a nutshell, we design the look and feel.
Trash out. Oh, they did? That's good. I'm just spray something right there. Oh, it smells bad. Oh, God.
So
You're
I had a look at our AI policy. I thought it would be good to see where we kind of started. I see it's now 2 years old, 2023. And so I just took sort of an excerpt from that, that, 2 years ago, we were saying that it will only be used in text, image, and material generation as a baseline for discovery. There was a caveat that in the next 5 years to revisit that and then see where the technology has gone. So what are we doing now? So we are using AI in several parts of in several of our phases. So research and analysis, mood boards, material experimentation, user scenarios, storyboarding, animation, and image to color analysis. So looking back at 23, we had just my students had just started using AI, and we had one of our, this is actually not a studio project, but is a thesis, which was still a 15-week starting project for research using Dolly. So Dolly had just been introduced. My student jumped on it immediately. This kind of a historical reference to understand like how the students are engaging with AI without being directed. The project really looked at how to explore materials, really push look and feel digitally. The student went on to, work with myself and another faculty member in UX design to create experiments that engaged color materials design and UX designers to see where that intersection was, and using these text to image programs. And when applying the concepts, she really looked at understanding how these could be used in a digital space. A lot of talk about the metaverse and how those materials could be applied in fashion and gaming and in interior design. From there, we had a student kind of take that concept and look into how we can integrate AI into the CMF workflow. And so this is something we talk a lot about in our studios, in the thesis project. And, when appropriate and when to still focus on the human hand and human thought. So this is a great chart showing the red is where this student started to employ AI, or thinking where we are currently in employing as CMF designers AI. Looking at the first stage, really sort of as a research and iteration starting point. Obviously, if it's used for creating CMF strategy or understanding how materials or parts are being broken up, there's a lack of interaction on the designer's part. And then finally, when we're actually doing strategies and creating palettes, there are a small area in which AI has been useful, which I will share with you. And then the final stage of like developing, rendering animation is also a space in which AI is being used. So this project was interesting because the student actually had done a internship at Nissan. And for her personal project, she had the opportunity to just really experiment with every form of AI that was available to her. So she was looking at text to image, animation. In this case, she decided to take that outcomes from that project and look at how she could apply it to a space in which she knew nothing about. So she's a product designer, coming from a product design background, but had very little experience in textiles. And so she really wanted to push herself into exploring that space. And so she had a concept about, kind of this interaction between analog and digital. So really looking at where she was scanning materials and then putting those through different AI programs to see, in this case, she used Adobe Firefly as a generative tool and to see what kind of outcomes. I think one of the things that is interesting for students is this kind of like the level of surprise and unexpected outcomes and kind of pushing them outside of their existing biases in design. For this one student, too, I think a lot of her interest was about color and how to push beyond our natural color biases because students often see, and designers as well, that there tend to be colors that you prefer. And so a lot of your strategies will incorporate those colors. And so she then looked at some of the outcomes that she had done and used another AI translation process, which is the ChatGPT picture to Pantone, which came out last year. It's was developed by Nicolene Van Enter, who is part of Footwearology. And so, really pushing ideas around iterative design or additive manufacturing. And I was a little skeptical at first using the picture to Pantone, but the early iterations obviously were not giving accurate outcomes. But it was a great starting point to really be able to kind of push beyond what students were currently using as far as a dropper in Photoshop, which was often how they were exploring color, selecting color for their palettes, using imagery as inspiration. And so this was great. It allowed to kind of push the nuances in what could be sort of extracted from images. And then also translating that into proportion. So because she doesn't have a background in textiles, understanding weave structure, understanding how colors might be used in proportion to one another, even going so far as to using ChatGPT to develop the actual weaving order of the structure, putting in different structures. And so she worked a lot with paper at first, and then she ended up moving into yarn and then finally additive manufacturing into 3D printing. Another area that there's a lot of discussion about in color materials, you know, because it's something that takes a lot of time, is the creating mood boards and finding those perfect images that that are right to express the mood. And so students have been experimenting with Midjourney, mostly, you know, to work out sort of concepts around the mood board process, and really looking to see, is it possible? Is it possible to be able to write, to do a text to image, to get that feeling, understanding of emotion, to understand lifestyle, and relate it back to functional and emotional attributes. And so the student did a deep dive into what that might look like using different prompts, and to see, you know, what some of those, you know, what the depth and breadth of those outcomes might be. I think in the end, it was a time saver as far as sort of pooling imagery. But in the end, the feeling was that the true hand of the designer, that editorial, that curatorial hand that the designer has to kind of translate the imagery into mood. So there was a lot of editing that had to be done. And the other thing to consider is that oftentimes when they're working with mood or imagery, you know, its context matters and timeline matters. And so pulling imagery from AI can sometimes be a disadvantage because it's not set in a time space that we understand. And so relating it back to trends, current trends, or, you know, understanding if this is something that's happening in the past, in the present, or in the future, to kind of ground the concepts. But from there, I mean, the student went on to kind of develop what was a more emotional outcome. So this is more about her actual weaving process, which is quite interesting. And so using, like I said, prompts to translate text or imagery into abstract translations, you know, so that they become more about texture and about color, and then how to translate that into a weave for a textile. So this is a very edited version of what was weeks of process and really trying to understand. And these are kind of successful outcomes, but, you know, there was a lot of iteration. You know, as we know, AI hallucinates. AI, you know, is never really going to, cannot read our minds yet. And so, you know, like, you know, so there's a lot of trial and error in this process. And again, from there, using this, the plugin for the picture to Pantone, was able to really pull out, you know, from a lot of color and nuance in the imagery, a selection of colors that not only that were more, not only a gradient of the colors, but complemented. So being able to add those kind of prompts to be able to select the color, but then to select colors that actually are working together to create the emotion. And then this was the outcome in print. So from the actual textile, the weavings, then she translated that once again through AI and then created digital prints. So it's kind of a, you know, when we think of design of like an 8, it's infinite, you know, in the way that, you know, we can kind of like work it from the analog to digital. And then a space in which so my students are still very much required to know how to render. It's really important, I feel, for them to remain competitive. And so they are still doing Keyshot, Blender. And so it's just, from, a lot of what they're doing is looking at materials and how to apply materials onto form, texture, lighting, and then how to apply that within on a product within a space or environment. Sometimes that doesn't allow for things like animation, which is something that is that I think everyone is looking for. We want to see everything in movement. And so students have used programs like Luma. This was Luma. Obviously, the resolution is nothing like what they would get in Keyshot, which is where but as we know, Keyshot rendering time is way longer than Luma. And so for a quick fix, this, is a good example of like having, I think this was something that they did for Industry Day. And so they had the rendering, but we felt like we just needed something to kind of like move on the screen. And so this was quick, 5 minutes. They took the rendering from their landscape or tray and the rendering that they had done for the interiors, and they meshed them together. So that's another space in which the students are using the AI. This is another example of what they had done in Keyshot, I think with Anthony. And thank you, Anthony. And then this was the mashup that they had done with Luma. So taking those two Keyshot renderings and just creating something a little more interactive. Unexpected. Obviously, again, those were done very quickly. And so, there's always opportunity for revision and play. So I just wanted this was something that actually just happened at a review at midterm, where, because the students have been, some of the students have been using the ChatGPT image to Pantone. I haven't really promoted it a lot because I want students to do the work. And so I really want them to understand how to see color, translate color, be able to look at imagery and be able to pull out nuance, not just color that is seen, but color that is also sensed within an image. And so I really push students to digitally select, but also to pull physical color and get it out so they can actually see it. And then again, it's a back and forth process. So then, but this is sometimes difficult for students, right? Not all students find this easy. And so have a student who had a great concept, but the translation was not strong. And so this is just kind of a overview of this is a sponsored project for New Balance, and they're looking at athletes, and this is actually an athlete that the student knows, and so is very informed on the consumer for this project. We came up with a concept. This athlete just got silver and is going for gold, decathlon, and so came out with this idea of a chameleon and that translation from silver into gold, and how would that look on a shoe. This was what was delivered, and you can see the color palette above the two colors, which if you know anything about chameleons, it's never black and white. It's never silver and gold. It's never that easy. And so, really push the student to suggested using this tool to start to kind of understand nuance. But I did it with a caveat, right? Because I still want my students to work manually, physically as well. Because for us, we are applying our concepts to real products. They need to be seen in real light. And so students really need to be able to get outside of the digital, and to be able to understand how to see and select. But this was the outcome after, quite quickly. This was, a day return on how then, it's not perfect. I'm still not sure where the green is coming from, but in that way, you need to check the ChatGPT, because I'm sure that that was suggested based on the image, but then going back and editing that. But the understanding of how to push nuance, I think that it's a good tool to be able to see different ways in seeing color. And then the last is just, there are some places where it just makes sense for the students to not spend a lot of time, because it's not really what their actual what they'll actually be doing on their in their jobs. And so, but for us within an academic environment, they do need to be able to communicate their ideas. And so when we're looking at user scenarios, this is a space where students can use text to image to be able to kind of show some storytelling or storyboarding of how they anticipate this user scenario. And then in the same way, if they're using it for like speculation. My last parting. Am I okay? Okay. It's just the discussion around AI and sustainability. So I think that we talk a lot about how AI is used in the classroom, but we're also very mindful that to use it responsibly, because it can be a very addictive rabbit hole on how, to kind of like make things more efficient. But, this actually came out of the very first project that was done in 2023 of just really understanding what it means to use AI, and both pro and con. And then just going back to the project that looked at text to textile, this was the slide that I showed you, and how AI is currently being used in CMF workflow. And then, understanding what that footprint is in those spaces for us, for our kind of workflow, where are the spaces where we are having the most impact, and then how can we kind of regain some of that time and energy back from where we have been focused on using AI. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much to both Anthony and Melanie. I know I see the clapping there. Love it. We are going to jump into a Q&A time period here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Noah, the Director of Educational Technology and Innovation. Just wanted to introduce myself in case there are some people on this call I haven't met yet. What we're going to do is I have a couple of questions I can get us started for Melanie and Anthony. I have not seen any questions come through into the chat. If you'd like to, you can add a question in the chat, and we will then ask that question to Melanie and Anthony on your behalf. You could also raise your hand, and we will just go through the questions that are appearing either in the chat or by a raised hand, and we will pose them to Melanie and Anthony. I'm going to pose a question first, and then if anyone else has a question, go ahead and post in the chat or raise your hand. But one question I did want to ask is, when you have suggested AI use to students, so Anthony, you mentioned Gemini and there was a little bit of apprehension, and Melanie, you mentioned looking at that Chat GPT Pantone item. What was the response from the students when you made that suggestion? Was there apprehension and pushback? And if so, how did you get past that barrier?
Do you want to go first, Melanie? Or want me to?
I can answer. Yes, thankfully there is pushback. The students are, which is why they probably wouldn't have done it on their own, most of them. But I think really truly looking at it as a tool that is a starting point, I think helps them in a space where they might be having a difficult time visualizing something digitally. So I do very much feel like, you know, I mean, my students, they want to, they're here to learn, right? And so they're here to understand all parts of the process. But I do see it as a really good vehicle, kind of like push push them outside of their own comfort zones. And so there's always space for that.
From the Gemini side, there was an absolute apprehension to use anything that was taking away their authentic voice. And the way I got over that hurdle is I said, this is a tool that you're going to use to be critical of data. You're speaking to a data set. And then the other thing, and I think this is where some of the apprehension comes from, is, us as professors, we have all these years of experience. We have a knowledge base that we can pull from of understanding what is correct and what we actually do understand because we have worked through that process. They don't quite have all of that knowledge and knowledge base yet. They're afraid of, am I critical? Do I know enough to have an opinion on this? So helping them walk through it, I think helps. I think showing them how I edit the AI when I give them back a response, that also helps. And then letting them know that it is just another opinion, right? We are still pushing the art forward and we're still developing the new creative ideas. So giving them ownership back in the process really lets them engage.
Yeah, thank you both. Ian has his hand up. Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, I was just typing a rather lengthy question, so it's probably easy if I read it out. But Melanie, you mentioned earlier that context matters and timeline matters, and I think this is a really intriguing thing for us to consider. I read a paper very recently, and I'll share a link to it in the chat, where the author calls for, I'm going to read it, I've got the paper right in front of me. He calls for reforming our curricula so that we see an end to the positioning of theory as a body of thought and critical skills that are in any way separable from production. And by that, he means we need to get students to refine prompt specifications and explore the relevant technical, historical, and critical specifications that underline a description of the required product. That's to say that as we utilize AI a lot more, students need to have a much stronger and greater understanding of that context, of that place. I mean, I wonder if you want to comment on that at all. It was an intriguing thing to see in that paper.
Yeah, I mean, for us, this is crucial because a lot of what we do in our research is based on trends. And so if you do not understand that, if the information, where in the timeline the information is coming in the context, then we have no way to map that and to understand whether or not it's a historical reference that we're seeing play out over time, or if it's something that's happening now and we're looking at, events that are happening on a micro level, or if it is something that is seen on a larger scale, looking at macro trends, which is a space in which we very much work. So we're looking for those long-term trends in order to support our claims, our strategies. And so if you're just pulling from an AI data set without any context, then there's no way to be able to frame that within a time frame. And so in essence, everything is very much can very much be the same. There can be anachronisms in images that don't, you know, that don't translate to real research.
Mhm. Okay, I mean, it seems to me that reading this is that subjects like liberal arts are becoming increasingly more important as we move forward. So I mean, I like the way that you framed it as students taking a sort of a curatorial, editorial hand in this. I think that's really powerful.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ian. I haven't seen any other questions come through. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that pause where we just give a moment here and see if there's another
So-
raised hand.
so-
Or Anthony, go ahead.
I have an AI comment for Melanie on some of the things that she actually showed.
Okay, great.
And one of them was your silver to gold and where did the green come from? And so in my mind, I'm postulating that AI is going to look at the averages of colors. The gold was the most kind of like muted a little bit. It wasn't pure gold, which
Mhm.
lends me to think that there was just a hint of green. And then the fact
Mhm.
that there's more shades of green than any other color on a lotus light.
Okay.
And if the computer is doing averages, it's like, well, then the most of whatever's there, and I need a tertiary color, I'm going to throw a green. So my question and ask for you would be, as they explore these different types of colors palettes from AI, does it trend to green?
Oh, that's interesting. I thought you were going to ask another question. I was ready to prepare. Um, I thought you were going to talk about nuance, because nuance is certainly something that they're not that some are trained to see because they have experience, and then obviously we train them to see nuance. But trending to green, that is
I
not
don't,
something that I noticed. You mean in using the AI? That's not something that I noticed, but it is true. It is the largest
the
spectrum.
most amount of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I think that the green came from literally, quite literally, that they had taken their screenshot of that palette, thrown it in with the chameleon that had some green on it, and it pulled that green. Whereas that's what AI is going to do, but you as the designer need to then edit that so that it fits. I was only hoping that they were able to pull out some nuance and see the nuance.
I might comment too. I'd be curious to test that multiple times because, you know, when I think lizard, I might think green. That might be the natural. So is there a bias inherent in the AI too, to maybe lizard green and going to that?
That is interesting. I don't
Looks-
know. I don't know the
yeah.
answer to that question.
I think it's one of those things that would take a lot of testing, you know, and trial and error potentially to figure out. But all right, Ian looks like he has another
I have
question.
another comment to add to this, really. I mean, I was talking to our friend Melanie Jodie Medic the other day. She's a CCS alumni who's been working in California with Google and other sort of big tech companies. And she made this really interesting observation about creativity. As we talk about generative AI as generating things, but she said she made the observation that a key part of the creative process is not just generating; it's also making connections, joining the dots, and we make those kind of creative leaps. We find those creative resonances, which are actually quite a viscerally human thing to do, because when AI does it, AI is looking for things that are statistically relevant. It still doesn't possess the human capability of making those connections, because those connections are based on just very, very complex and unique experiences that each human being has. And that insight to me was really important. That's how we kind of retain a part of the human action within this. So, you know, how does AI decide which color is very different to how a human's going to choose that color.
Well, 100%. This is why the human eye is always our final decision maker in color.
Given a beat here, any other questions?
I'm gonna ask a question for Anthony, since you asked one to me. So I remember you talking about this a lot in another workshop that we had on AI, and it's something that that I really love that you're doing, but being able to translate the learning to a broad spectrum of learners. And so so I think when we talked once, have you ever created a schedule for each, like try to kind of like map out specific schedules or sort of flows or timelines for specific students within the class?
No, I haven't gotten to the point where everyone gets their own timeline. The way that I see most, because I want a large amount of class participation. I want students engaging with other students and students' work. And so to do that, I need to make the time that they're in class valuable to them as an experience. So when I set up those initial assignments, when I share that screen, like I will very much say to like my students who I know do not like reading at all, I'll say, ignore all of this and don't use it. I just want these three things. However you think that is, show me what those three things are, right? And then I have these other students that are like, okay, now you said the picture should be no more or less than, and they're like drilling into the infinite level of detail. I'm like, stop chasing the grade, just do the process and get through that. I'm like, we're trying to learn something. So you have both spectrums there. So providing them enough information, and then as a teacher, and this is where rubrics become really important, is providing enough information as a teacher for them to just submit the way that they're going to submit, and then using the rubrics to make it even as how you grade it, right? So I want to be able to equally grade each student based off of what they're doing and they're turning in. Particularly for this studio, the fact that it is a competition, I am very strict on, I need at least this assignment to have this many pages and these things, because that's prepping them for when you enter a competition and they say, hey, file size is this big, this is this big, this is what we need. Those are reasons you get excluded from winning, right? So when you're going to get judged, you want to make sure. So making that part of the experience, I think, is also helping them understand it. Did I answer the question or just go off on a rabbit?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I love it. I will be following your lead.
I think we
Okay.
have time for one more question. If anybody has another question that they'd like to pose. Okay, I do have one. So this might be geared a little bit more towards Anthony, since Melanie, you're using it in a little bit of a different way. But Anthony, you outlined this process where students were using AI, Gemini in a couple of different locations. Is that incorporated or considered in a final grade or grading in any way? And if so, how are you viewing that as part of the whole project?
Like grading their use of AI to make sure they're using it,
Or the assignment that they're doing itself, is AI a part of the grade? Is it separate? Are you assessing anything? I'd be curious.
no, AI, in my mind, AI is just a tool. And if you use it, that's great. If you don't use it, that's great. I want to make sure they haven't missed anything from a knowledge-based standpoint. Because ultimately, I see the evolution of the people that we're trying to create. Like we're creating people with hard skills and ability to draw, render, and imagine things. But because of the way the technology is shifting, they're going to have to be more like design directors by the time they graduate than traditional designers. But that requires them to have not only all this like hard skills to start with, but then that ability to use a critical eye to really dive into those aspects. So pairing that with AI to support those ideas and allowing them to expand their research in a meaningful way, that's important. But then from there also to say, hey, you know what, this is garbage, what this thing just spit out. And it is not with the vibe and the mood that I'm trying to create, and just putting it aside is fantastic. So part of that is when they turn in homework, They can, they submit everything via PDF. That can be snaps of a mural board. It can be hand-drawn, snaps with photos and cell phones, handwritten. I don't care how you give me the content as long as I get to the content. And then it gets refined down as they move through their presentation process. But when it comes to their presentation process, because there's been those reflective steps organized by AI all along the way, then they're just like, I have an abundance of content to choose from, and I'm not trying to scramble and pull all-nighters to get my work done, because I don't want them doing that. I don't want them doing all-nighters. I want them just experiencing the class and having great outcomes.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. I want to say thank you again to Melanie and Anthony and to everyone who posed questions. This was a wonderful conversation. We are going to have a companion session to this next semester. The date is to be determined, but we will be looking at integrating AI into lecture courses. So make sure you join us all for that to continue the conversation on the AI. I'll also mention November 21st, we have another Dine and Discuss session where we meet in T280 and discuss ways you might be using AI and just get some feedback, hear what others are doing with it. So please feel free to join us for that as well. I thank you again for coming today. I hope you all have a great and wonderful day.